I am curious about learning how to effectively prevent cancer in Lynch syndrome populations and populations at risk for cancer in general. So I am Eduardo Vilar-Sanchez. I am professor and chair ad interim in the Department of Clinical Cancer Prevention at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston.
Can you tell me more about your work?
Yeah, so I am a physician scientist and a medical oncologist by training. I have been directing research here in MD Anderson for the past 14 years towards discovering new ways to prevent cancer, in particular colorectal cancer in hereditary cancer syndromes, in particular Lynch syndrome and other related syndromes to colorectal cancer such as familial adenomatous polyposis.
Can you explain what Lynch syndrome is?
Lynch syndrome is a genetic condition, a condition that people diagnosed with it are born with, that basically put them at a higher risk of developing different types of cancer through their lifetime. So I think it's fair to say that it's a predisposition syndrome that for decades was known to be associated with colon and rectal cancer, but that we have been learning that actually now can be named a pan-cancer syndrome, in the sense that subjects diagnosed with Lynch syndrome are at a higher risk for colon, rectum, endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer, urinary tract tumors, gastric cancer, intestinal cancer, and even brain tumors such as glioblastomas.
Do people know that they have this syndrome?
Within the Lynch syndrome population, I would say that there are two big groups. The first group is those patients that their family has the genetic predisposition. And this population of patients are typically engaged already on cancer screening and cancer surveillance. But then there is another group that get diagnosed from the fact that there is a family member that has been diagnosed with a cancer within the Lynch syndrome spectrum at a young age. So one example is a young person diagnosed with colon cancer under age 30. And then through the process of being worked up for that tumor, they discovered that that tumor has certain molecular features that are characteristic of Lynch syndrome, and that triggers genetic testing. And then discovery through genetic testing that the cause of that cancer has been a genetic predisposition that obviously has been running in the family probably for decades. And that also now triggers the testing of other people within the family that we call at-risk carriers or at-risk relatives.
And what would you say is the percentage of the population, either in the US or the world, that has Lynch syndrome?
Yeah. So if we look into statistics for Lynch syndrome in the US population, right, there are estimations that probably we have 1 million carriers in United States. I would say 85 to 90% of that million carriers do not know that they are affected by the disease. So there is a lot of undiagnosed patients with Lynch syndrome out there.
And recently you had a publication about a vaccine for Lynch syndrome carriers. Can you tell me more about that?
Vaccines are new tools for cancer prevention and cancer therapeutics that have emerged, obviously. Our manuscript in particular is looking at an adenoviral vaccine. So basically non-replicative adenoviral vaccine construct that basically contains a big number of proteins that are made in by Lynch syndrome tumors, that are expressed by Lynch syndrome tumors. This vaccine is called NUS-209, and the 209 comes from the fact that there are 209 peptides, friendship peptides or information that will encode those peptides within the vaccine construct. This vaccine strategy comes with a prime and a boost. First a prime and 8 weeks later a boost. The content of the vaccine in the number of the peptides or neoantigens, I will say, that is how we technically call it, is the same. They are just organized in a different way. These neoantigens, I will say, are mutated proteins, so proteins that are aberrantly made by cancer cells. So they are not expressed in normal cells, which it makes the vaccine safer in that regard. The clinical trial that we conducted is a phase 1 clinical trial, was sponsored by the Division of Cancer Prevention of the National Cancer Institute. So this is a non-industry sponsored clinical trial, although the company that makes the vaccine, NUS209, the name is NUSCOM, provided the vaccine in kind. In this clinical trial, we invited 45 participants diagnosed with Lynch syndrome to get enrolled in the trial. They were all healthy carriers, meaning that they were not diagnosed with cancer, or they could have been diagnosed with cancer prior to entering in the trial, but that they needed to be disease-free for at least 6 months. So healthy carriers to receive basically 1 shot of prime and 1 shot of boost, 8 weeks apart. And everybody, all the participants will have undergone a colonoscopy at the time of study entry and a year after receiving the first shot. The goal of a phase 1 clinical trial is always safety. First, we need to be sure that the vaccine is safe for the participants, and that was proved extensively. That doesn't mean that we didn't see any adverse events. We saw adverse events that were expected from any vaccination. So those are so-called reactogenic adverse events. So people experiencing fever, chills, pain at the site of the injection after the administration, but all of them were transient and went away, mostly by itself. So in that regard, we covered one of the goals, proving that it was safe. The second goal within this phase 1 was to prove that the vaccine was efficacious on doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is to generate a strong immune response to the neoantigens, the peptides that were included within the vaccine construct. In that regard, we have data from 37 of the 45 patients enrolled in the clinical trial. And in all of them, in all of the 37 evaluable trial participants, we saw a strong immune response, meaning that there was an increase in the immunogenicity to those peptides that was highly significant. So the vaccine is proving efficacious in generating an immune response and safe. And then there are other findings that relate to clinical outcomes that are also within the manuscript.
How long might this take? What is the process for the phases to be available to more people?
So the vaccine continues on clinical development, as in any process of clinical development of a therapy or a preventive measure. From phase 1, we need to consider phase 2, and then from phase 2, phase 3. The phase 2 is a type of clinical trial that will look at a clinical endpoint of effectiveness, right? And that would be either an advanced premalignancy, what is called an advanced adenoma as the endpoint, an advanced polyp, if you wish, or an early stage tumor. So that's the next step in improving what is the value of this vaccination, to basically conduct a clinical trial that will hopefully demonstrate a decrease in the incidence of premalignancy and early stage tumors. From that, phase 3 clinical trials are often going to ask a similar question, but then randomized to placebo.
Could this vaccine be applicable to other types of syndromes
Well, so in general, the vaccine contains neoantigens, peptides that are shared and that are in common in three types of tumors, specifically to Lynch syndrome. So for colon, rectum, endometrium, and gastric. So it's covering at least three tumors or four tumors, depending if you consider colorectal one or two. Now, is it applicable to other genetic conditions? I will say no, because this is a targeted intervention that contains peptides that are specific to Lynch syndrome, or what is also known as mismatch repair deficiency, which is basically the molecular mechanism that is behind the generation of tumors in Lynch syndrome carriers. Mismatch repair deficiency is what triggers carcinogenesis in this disease. Now, is the approach could be this approach also applicable to other genetic diseases? The answer is potentially yes. Obviously, it will require to perform a survey of what are common neoantigens or common peptides that are present in early stage tumors or premalignant lesions in the carriers of those genetic diseases, and from there, this platform should be flexible to incorporate those.
You said earlier that there are a number of people that probably 85 to 90% of those people who have Lynch syndrome might not be aware. What are ways or what are things that people should maybe look towards or notice to maybe get tested in order to know, in order to get the vaccine?
I will say that there are several genetic clues. Clue number one is think if there is family history of cancers diagnosed at a young age. And what do we understand by young age? People usually think on pediatric cancers, but in reality is any cancer diagnosed in anybody that is under age 50. That is what we consider young age. That's clue number one. Then the second clue is that there are certain cancers that are associated with each other, certain types. So let me give you a couple of examples. If we are seeing aggregation of cancers among family members of one type, like, oh, I have a lot of family history of breast cancer, or there is a lot of cases of colon cancer within my family, that's a clue that is important. And then the association between types. So colon goes with endometrium and ovarian. And when you see aggregation of colon, endometrium, and ovarian among family members, that also is a clue for Lynch syndrome. Likewise, if you see aggregation of breast cancer and ovarian cancer, that may be BRCA, or if you see sarcoma with leukemia, that could be lymphomanic. So that's another clue. And then the other clue is a consistency among generations, right? Okay, this is happening on every single generation. We have lots of cases like this. Obviously, going back to the second clue, there are cancers that are more common than others, lung cancer, cervical cancer. Those tend to be more environmentally related. Lung cancer, obviously, due to smoking, and cervical cancer due to HPV infection. So sometimes public gets a little bit mistaken because there is aggregation of things that are not related. So those are the features. And I think the other two things that I will overemphasize here is that communication among families is key. Talk about your family history. I mean, usually cancer has been a taboo or a subject that has been a taboo, and I think sharing this information with family members can help saving lives. Just talk about what is going on in your family, inform, and that can trigger basically referrals to genetic counselors, or even talk to your primary care physician. Share your family history with a primary care physician who is also a professional that can recommend to have a conversation with a genetic counselor.
In the news and in the media lately, there's been a lot of emphasis on the increase of colorectal cancers in young adults. Is that related to Lynch syndrome? And if those cases or any of those cases possibly people who have Lynch syndrome, or are there other things related to that as well?
Thank you for the question, and this is very important. Yes, we are seeing an increase, demographic increase, epidemiological increase of colon cancer under age 50. But this is due to several factors. I don't think there is an increase in genetic cases per se. The genetic pool is the genetic pool. It's not like all of a sudden there are more genetic diseases out there. Yes, we are more effectively detecting these genetic diseases, as I was telling you, because of the accessibility to genetic testing. But I think the increase in young onset, that is how we call it, colorectal cancer, is due to factors such as, for example, implementation of colonoscopy screening. We have been very effective implementing colonoscopy screening in individuals that are aged. So we are more effectively preventing colorectal cancer in older folks. So that is what is accounting for one of the factors that is accounting. Then there's a lot of changes in lifestyle, right? So we live in a society now that is more sedentary, spend less time being active. There is a big change in how we eat, what we are consuming, and exposures. I mean, exposures in general are also big responsible of what's going on in cancer incidence, right? Now, it's true that when we look at the epidemiological data, and this is an exercise that we did in MD Anderson, we published back in 2015. If you go and you look at the incidence of hereditary diseases in extreme populations, like people diagnosed with cancer younger than age 30, then yes, you see Lynch syndrome responsible of 25% of the cases. But this is just because, again, when you have a genetic predisposition, you are going to develop cancer at a younger age.
Do you find things often that fascinate you in your research, in your job every day? And what are those things?
It has been spectacular, the journey that we have seen in the world of Lynch syndrome, and at a personal level has allowed me to grow so much as a person and also academically, right? So one of the drivers for me to go to science is the opportunity to be learning on a daily basis, things that I don't know, but that keeps my curiosity on all the time. For example, I was trained classically in molecular biology and cancer genetics, so I was more knowledgeable on genomics, sequencing, and that's what one of the triggers for me to get into hereditary cancer syndromes. And all of a sudden, then by digging further in the biology, and this is the product of the scientific knowledge of all the community, so much in the middle of the process of carcinogenesis in Lynch syndrome. So by nature, I had to start training myself in immunology. And I am not a cancer immunologist by training. I don't pretend to be a cancer immunologist. But now, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, my lab is almost 85% of what it's doing is immunology related. And so we had to learn a lot of immunology. We had to learn a lot of vaccinology, which are things that I never imagined that I was going to be in the middle of it. And again, for scientists like me, it is a very rewarding process because we are driven by curiosity, and all of a sudden had to go back to study, and you had to go back to book.
And also layering your studies together and kind of cross-disciplinary in a way. I mean, within the field of cancer, right? But it's still that I find really fascinating.
It is very rewarding because then you're borrowing tools from many other fields that all of a sudden you don't even thought that you were going to be contemplating. So again, to me, it's always a fun and entertaining journey. But at the same time, one of the other things that have been very, very rewarding working on this vaccine is the huge interest that has generated among the patient community. I cannot tell you the number of emails that I got from people all over the world that wanted to be vaccinated with this vaccine and with other vaccines that are also being developed for Lynch syndrome.
Thank you, Dr. Vilar-Sanchez, for joining us today. and sharing your research. It was really wonderful to learn more about your work, and I will, though, let you go so you can get back to your patients and work and research. All the best.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.